Hey bookworms, it's Jade from Bedtime Bookworm. Welcome back to my channel. It's been a while since I filmed a video. I've had a pretty busy summer, but now I'm settled into my new apartment and I'm really looking forward to making more videos again. A couple videos back, I talked about how I wanted to stop doing wrap-ups on my channel and do more tag videos instead. One of the types of videos that I wanted to start doing is the monthly recommendation videos. Monthly Recommendations is a Goodreads group that's hosted by Kayla Rain and Trina from Between Chapters. I'll link both of their channels and the Goodreads group down below. So the topic for August was to recommend one book for every category that they did within the past year. Even though it's not August anymore, I really wanted to do the August topic because I thought it was a good way to get started in the monthly recommendations group. I have 12 books to recommend to you guys, so let's just get started. First category is underrated books. The book I'm going to recommend for this is Incarnate by Jodi Meadows. Incarnate is a fantasy set in a world where everybody who lives in this world has been reincarnated over and over for thousands of years. So what that means is that basically everyone already knows each other because they've lived with the same group of people over these thousands of years, just in different bodies. And that is until Anna comes around. She is a new person that is plopped down in this world full of people who have just been reincarnated over and over again. When I first picked this up, the idea of people being reincarnated was a little weird and I wasn't sure what I was going to think of it. It ended up being a really interesting element to a world that I hadn't ever read before. I really think this is an interesting fantasy setting and I definitely recommend it. The next category is a book set in school. This topic automatically made me think about Saving Francesca by Melina Marchetta. I read this book in the spring of 2015 and I loved it so much. If you've been around my channel, you probably know that I don't read a whole lot of contemporary. It's just not the genre that I reach for. I'm definitely more of a fantasy, dystopian, sci-fi sort of reader. But occasionally I do pick up a contemporary book that comes highly recommended, and this was one of them. Saving Francesca is about Francesca, who attends an all-girls school. Francesca's mom is going through a deep depressive episode during this book, and it's about how Francesca and her family go about their day-to-day lives while their mom is going through this and how it affects Francesca. As someone who's had depression and have had family members with depression, I really appreciated the way it was portrayed in this book. This book is also about family and love and friendship. It was just so good and beautiful and I loved it so much. Definitely my favorite contemporary book I've ever read. The next category is a creepy book and I'm definitely going to recommend The Monstrumologist by Yancey. I read The Monstrumologist last October as kind of a Halloween read and it was my first Yancey that I had ever read. This book isn't ghost creepy or thriller creepy, but it's monster creepy, if you couldn't tell from the title. The Monstrumologist is from the point of view of a 12-year-old boy who is apprenticed to a monstrumologist, which is someone who studies monsters. It's set in a colonial America sort of time period and is told through journal entries. I definitely found the monsters in this book to be creepy and grotesque and gross. Some of the things that are described I couldn't stop picturing in my mind when I was going to bed. I love creepy stuff, so it was awesome, and I'm definitely looking forward to reading the next book in the series this October. The next category is a trilogy. For this, it was really hard to pick. I've read a lot of trilogies over the last couple of years, but I finally settled on the Shadow and Bone series by Leigh Bardugo. My friend Brittany from Brittany's Book Rambles loves Leigh Bardugo and Shadow and Bone, and she finally convinced me to read it last fall, and I very quickly fell in love with this series. I'm really bad at describing the series, but Shadow and Bone is set in a world where some people have magic and they are called the Grisha, and the main character Alina doesn't realize until the beginning of the first book that she has magic powers, and the series is basically a story about good versus evil. Let's just leave it at that. It's a lot more complicated than that. If you haven't checked out Leigh Bardugo, I definitely recommend the Grisha trilogy. The next category is a book that you think people should read as soon as possible. For this category, I chose And I Darken by Kiersten White. I read this earlier this summer and I loved it so much. I know that this book has some mixed reviews out there and I could definitely recognize that it's not for everybody, but it was definitely for me. And I Darken is an alternate historical fiction that is set in the height of the Ottoman Empire. This was not a time period that I was familiar with, so it was really interesting for me to read about it. It is a little bit slow and There's a lot of details. It was definitely a really rich world, and it takes place over a really long time span. So I think as long as you go into it knowing that, hopefully the pacing will work for you. What I loved most about this series were the characters. There are 3 main characters, and the relationships between these 3 people are so complex. I can't even begin to describe what their relationships are like. And that's what I loved about this book. These characters are really complex, and the feelings that they have for each other are really complex. I just thought the ending was beautiful. It made me cry, which isn't hard to do, but I just sat there thinking, wow, what a beautiful story. I definitely think that if you like historical fiction, you should check out Darken because it was really good. The next category is a fantasy book. My go-to recommendation for fantasy in the past year and a half or so has been A Darker Shade of Magic by Victoria Schwab. So far, 2 books of this series have been published, and they're both great. I love this world, I love the characters, I love the magic system. I just really like it, and I think it is a fantastic fantasy series. Definitely recommend it. The next category is a book with little to no romance, and for this I chose The Knife of Never Letting Go. I talked about this series quite a lot earlier this year when I read it for the first time. This series made me fall in love with Patrick Ness. Knife of Never Letting Go is technically a science fiction because it's set on another planet. It's set in this world where everybody can hear each other's thoughts, even animals, and there are no women. I don't like to give a lot more information than that because I think this book is full of lots of twists and surprises, but there's definitely no romance in this book, and I definitely recommend it. It's one of my favorite books and series of all time. The next category is a standalone. I don't read a lot of standalones, but luckily I read one recently that I really enjoyed and definitely wanted to use for this topic, and that is The Coldest Girl in Coldtown by Holly Black. This was my second book that I'd read by Holly Black. I know a lot of people might not be into vampires anymore, but I still really love vampire stories, especially fresh take on vampire stories, and that's what I got with The Coldest Girl in Coldtown. I thought the mythology around the vampires in this book was really different and interesting. That was probably my favorite part about it, but I also really enjoyed the main character. I thought she was strong and smart and resourceful. Basically, the main character wakes up in a house after a night of partying, and when she walks out, she finds that everybody who was at the party was murdered by vampires the night before, and there's blood everywhere. So if you're looking for a standalone and you like a good vampire story with a twist, I definitely recommend you check this one out. The next category is your favorite survival story. This one was easy because the book was fresh on my mind. I picked Angelfall by Susan E. Angelfall is a post-apocalyptic dystopian set in a world where angels have come to Earth and killed most of the people on Earth. It's about Penryn trying to survive and take care of her family, which consists of her sister, Paige, who is in a wheelchair, and her mother, who is schizophrenic. Having a schizophrenic mother and a sister who's in a wheelchair in a post-apocalyptic world definitely makes for a good survival story. This book really surprised me when I read it. It's so gritty, and it was a lot darker than I had anticipated. I almost picked this as my creepy book because of how dark it is, but it's definitely my favorite survival story. So if you're looking for a post-apocalyptic survival story with a little bit of diversity thrown in there, definitely check out Angelfall. The next category is my favorite book, friendship. This was really hard to narrow down. There's definitely a lot of really good friendships out there and books that I love. I finally settled on Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. The specific friendship in this book that I'm referring to is between Karou and Zuzana. Daughter of Smoke and Bone is a urban fantasy, and it's about Karou, who has to straddle both our normal world and this other magical world that she's halfway grown up in. In our everyday world, Karou is an art student, and her best friend is Zuzana. These two girls have a really great friendship. They're always supporting each other, and they just know each other so well. No matter what happens to Karou, Zuzana is always there and supportive of her, and basically can't be scared away by anything, and I love that. The next category is a book set outside of the US. Daughter of Smoke and Bone would have been a good one to use for this, but I didn't want to double use it, so I settled on My Lady Jane by Cynthia Hand, Brodi, Ashton, and Jodi Meadows. This is a really funny book. It's an alternate historical fantasy that is set in England, and it's about Lady Jane Grey and her cousin King Edward. This book is also a comedy. It's very much in the style of The Princess Bride, so don't go into it looking for something serious because it's definitely not not a serious book. I read this book earlier this summer and it made me laugh so many times. It's really cute. There are shapeshifters in it and there's romance, and it's just an adorable and hilarious book, and I really loved it, and you should definitely check it out. So the last category of this monthly recommendations 1 year tag is a book with my favorite empowering female character. Once again, this was really hard. I have read a lot of books that have really good empowering female characters. Some of the books that I immediately thought of I've already mentioned in this video, such as Darken and Angelfall, but I wanted to pick something different. So the next one on my list is probably Ruby from The Darkest Minds. The Darkest Minds is a dystopian trilogy by Alexandra Bracken, and it's one of my favorite dystopians. It's set in a world where children start developing superpowers, and basically adults become frightened of children and send them to concentration camps, and it's about Ruby escaping from a concentration camp, finding some friends, and them surviving and trying to find their freedom. Ruby is so smart, and her personality is really strong. She's quick on her feet and always able to think her way out of situations, and I really enjoyed that. She's also really loyal and has a great group of friends. I almost use this book as the friendship category as well. So I definitely find Ruby to be an empowering female character. Ruby and Liam are one of my favorite ships. I definitely recommend this book and this trilogy, so if you haven't read it and you like dystopian, definitely check it out. So that's 12 categories that have been in the monthly recommendations over the past year. I hope I got you excited about some books that you haven't read before, and I'm definitely looking forward to doing more of these monthly recommendation videos. That's all I have for now, so if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe, and until next time, bookworms, keep reading. Bye! Blah, 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 blah. The dogs are barking. There are also dragons in this. There are also dragons in this fantasy world, which I loved. I always, anytime people, the series is basically that have been that's all I have for now. So that's all I have for now. So that's all I have for now. Bye!